The aforementioned Richard Stiennon and Dan Lohrmann, they're a dynamic duo that comes in to scare us all the time. Not personally scare us, but they scare us with the cybersecurity headlines. And there's a bunch of stuff going on out there. Let me kick it off with, I got your list here. NATO cyber attacks. Who wants to take that?
Well, Dan wrote about it. Let him take it.
All right, Dan, you got the ball. Go. And
Well,
that's your next Maryland quarterback, right?
I know Richard's got a lot of great comments as well on the space, so I'll just kind of tee up. But yeah, it's certainly a hot topic on LinkedIn, and the part that's a little we'll get to, maybe disagree on a little bit, is the unprecedented word. But NATO countries have been hit with this really ongoing cyber attacks over the last 6 months, and most recently Montenegro had major attack. We have Estonia's been attacked with Albania, and a few others. Also, NATO applicants, they're not in NATO yet, but Finland and Sweden have undergone attacks. So what we're seeing is just really kind of critical infrastructure being hit. It is impacting major parts of these really countries, say states, but really had lots and lots of different challenges faced. I mean, one of the headlines literally said from CNN, Albania blames Iran for second cyber attack since July, but basically sent back into the dark ages, as some of these headlines were saying, sent back into, analog and or losing power and or losing other kind of utilities and things like that. So some of these have been more significant than others. I wrote about this quite a bit in this blog that's gotten a lot of attention. I think argument has been, is it really unprecedented when you start talking about things that Richard knows well, like Stuxnet and other kinds of things that are out there? That's not really the thrust of this in my article, in my blogs. It's really just been the challenge that even though in the United States we haven't seen maybe the Colonial Pipeline kind of incident in 2022, we have seen major attacks against our NATO allies that have had significant impact, and that's really the focus of this piece.
Richard?
Yeah, in context, right, there's a greater conflict going on, and it's of course Russia trying to influence all these countries that are close to it, and they're trying to spread their sphere of influence to. Montenegro, of course, Russia actually, almost overturned or successfully completely corrupted the elections about 4 years ago. That was using their information ops rather than cybersecurity. So a bit of this type of cyber attack is lashing out, frustration. It's minor disruption, regardless of the dramatic nature of it, compared to being invaded, like Ukraine, right? So, and we watch Ukraine get under multiple attacks over the last 5 years, including 40% of their power grid completely shut down, and they too had to go back to manual systems. The thing about the Montenegros and Albanias of the world is that they are just coming along into the 21st century, so they still have the manual mechanical systems they can rely on. We're going to be talking about ransomware in a little bit, and it's like most Western companies don't actually have any of their manual systems anymore. So, but we'll get to that when we get there. I think of the repercussions when, right now we're seeing these types of attacks escalate when Russia is apparently completely losing in the battles in Ukraine. Something that, for some reason hasn't been in the news. There's some other big news item that occurred over the weekend, and that's all I can see when I turn on the TV. And yet it's pretty big news when embattled Ukraine actually pushes the giant Russian forces back to the borders in some cases. Look at the implications of that. If Russia literally has to pull out. And there's a route, which there is a route going on right now. They pull out, what are the implications? You already have internal city managers publicly calling for Putin to resign, which shows either they know that that's safe to do or they're really ballsy. And I don't think they're really ballsy.
Well, there's also those 50,000 body bags coming back to Mother Russia that I imagine that's pretty upsetting for a lot of families, right?
Yeah, it's hard to call them all heroes, and not to mention the images and such that we're all seeing.
Now, this is clearly going after NATO, but one of the things we talked about before the war started, what was that, back in late February, early March, is that we thought they were also going to go after the U.S. Are you seeing any signs that our Russian friends are going after the U.S. infrastructure at all?
I'm not. Are you, Dan?
Yeah, no, I certainly not to the level that they're hitting the NATO allies. I agree. I mean, you never say never. I agree. We don't have any, like I said, colonial pipeline, JBS meat kind of, big, headline grabbing kind of attacks going on. Do I think there's a debate going on from the people I'm speaking with about how good our defenses are versus how hard they're trying versus is there stuff even happening that we're going to hear about later, right? So, because you always have that dwell time question, which is, the dwell time's down compared to history, but it still can be 100 days, even some people say it's in the 200-day, 250-day range, depending on what kind of attacks we're talking about. So, could there be things going on? Sure. I don't think at the level we're talking about the NATO critical infrastructure kind of attacks. Certainly, we get into that whole discussion as well, Mike and Matt, around organized criminals versus Russian state attacks versus is it the same people? Are they cousins? Are they wearing one hat during the day and a different hat at night? It gets hard because I think the answer to all of the above is yes. I think a lot of these people have multiple hats that they're wearing, and is it coming from Russia? Is it coming from organized criminals in other parts of the world that may be sympathetic? I do want to point out too that a lot of the focus obviously has been on Russia, but when you start talking about Iran hitting Albania, then you start thinking wider, around, and I really do think it's important too that we've kind of lost sight of the Chinese attacks and what's going on with Taiwan, but it's really. I suspect that a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, and I hope it doesn't happen. I hope China never invades Taiwan, but we could be connecting other dots in other places in other parts of the world that aren't just about Russia. So I don't, again, I think Richard's more of an expert on some of that specific intelligence than I am, but I am concerned about some of the stuff going on from Iran hitting NATO countries. The U.S. did come back again, back to the unprecedented word, with I know they really would love to, complete that agreement with Iran, and I really think the Biden administration would like to, the nuclear talks to be back on track, and get that agreement going again. But they just, some pretty strong words from the Biden administration back, after the Albanians were hit. And talking about sanctions and other types of things against Iran. So I think that is still significant, not to the point of, Stuxnet or other types of attacks, but there's a lot going on below the surface. It doesn't make the headlines, certainly doesn't beat out, everything going on in England right now with, the Queen passing away and those kinds of things. But there's still a lot happening behind the scenes.
Matt?
All right. We also, I know, wanted to talk a little bit about the latest in ransomware attacks. I guess there have been a couple in the Los Angeles School District and IHG Hotels, which is the Holiday Inn chain, and all of its sub-brands. So let's talk about what's up with ransomware. What's the latest wrinkle in that?
Let me dive in first, real quick, Richard. Then you can jump in and add your 2 cents. I really do. Think this is significant, and obviously, thank God the schools were able to open on Tuesday. But talking about 550,000 students, 70,000 employees in LA, had to reset their passwords, but there was a lot of different reports about what's going on behind the scenes, significant ransomware attack. And actually, I'm hearing in a number of other school districts that maybe are not public that I know about around the country that were hit, that I'm not at liberty to disclose the names. But this continues. Black Fog, which is one of the reports I try and read on a regular basis, give them a little bit of airtime here, but in August recorded 39 ransomware attacks, second highest month ever recorded. And they had 10 health systems around the world were hit, and one of them in France, $10 million ransom demand. So it is still the numbers have been ratcheting up consistently. They were really bad in 2019. They were really bad in 2020. So people say doubled in 2020, doubled again in 21. And then we saw a lot of different discussions related to the fact that it's impossible, 2022 could even be worse than 2021. So the numbers continue to grow and the number of attacks continue to grow.
And now on those, though, I keep hearing it could be North Korea because they're so broke right now. They're doing anything to raise money. Do you think there's any validity to that?
I've seen that there are North Korean attacks for ransomware just because of the money. So for sure, that's a good source of revenue for them if they can manage to convert it from Bitcoin into a usable currency and then go on from there.
Chinese yuan, maybe, or something, right? So
something, yeah. But the North Korea even uses their consulates and embassies around the world to both launder money and to sell drugs. So they ship drugs in to the city.
And the diplomatic pouches, right? Yeah. So.
Right. And then they sell them there. So it's one way to earn money.
Yeah. The diplomatic pouches have a little bit of white powder in them from time to time.
Exactly.
Oh, geez.
Or a couple kilos. So, obviously ransomware is a great way to tap into a cash flow. It's funny, Dan is much more empathetic with the victims of ransomware than I am. I just, there's so much data I've got to track every single day. Every time I see a successful ransomware attack and the breach notification that goes out, I just put that organization in that bucket of never spent on cybersecurity. Never read Dan's blog, never read my blogs or any of my output. They're not my audience. I can't talk to them. I can't reach them. Even if I said right now on my tech TV that every single school district in the country should immediately back up all of their computers, not a single person who works there would hear that.
And how often do they need to be backed up? Just every single day?
Why not?
Yeah. Okay.
Every single day. How much data can you afford to lose? How much data can you afford to tell a ransomware attacker, forget it, we're not paying you your ransom because we have all of our data.
Yeah, if only Colonial Pipeline had done that, right? So,
but I think and also in terms of how ransomware attacks happen. I mean, let's let people know, how does this happen? How does ransomware get into your system, and how do you stop it? I mean, this is pretty basic stuff, right?
Sure. Well, let me start on that. Then I want to make another comment on that conversation we were just having. In many cases, it almost always starts with some way of them getting your identities. So it could be clicking on a link and gaining access, via somebody falls for some type of phishing scam. There also are more and more stolen identities available because of all these breaches and hacks we've had. More and more identities on the dark web, black market, basically where you can buy, username, password, access. That's why it's so important to do a multi-factor authentication and make sure that's a priority across the board. Now, yes, that somewhere out there watching this will say, Dan, you can still defeat multi-factor, but it's much, much harder to defeat multi-factor authentication where you have a username, password, and then people would, text you another 6-digit PIN you have to type in addition for that session, etc. And there are ways to defeat that as well. But basically they get credentials, they get into the system, whether they get in via phishing or buying credentials. Once they're in, they like I said, the dwell time can be weeks or months. A lot of times they try and stay very quiet, and they try and see where they can go and learning where things are. They, one of the first things the bad guys want to get to, right, is your backups. They want to be able to make sure you don't use those backups, and so they'll try and get in and basically put ransomware wherever they can, however they can. They map out your systems. They do what they can to cause a mass amount of destruction so that you're going to pay. I mean, their goal is to get paid. Also, many times it's now, extortion and multiple other things they're doing. They could resell the data, basically, do 2, 3, 4 different things in addition to the ransom. A lot of times they're going to just try and exfiltrate that data, get the data, and then sell the data as well. Especially if you don't pay, they threaten to sell it. So, but the other thing I just mentioned, is why I maybe have some of that empathy, Richard, that you say is that one thing I totally agree with, and I see this again and again and again in what I do with Presidio and the other previous roles I've held in different companies, is there's a world of difference in a government and a private sector organization if they've been through an incident and they haven't. I mean, the focus, how they listen, how they take action. Quite frankly, you go to a good friend, colleague from a very well-known consulting company. I won't mention the name of the company, but basically would say, Dan, if I go in and they've never been through an incident, they're all on their iPhones, they're all, in and out of the meetings, leaving early, coming in late, not a lot of attention. If they've been through an incident, if they know what it really means and what the impact is to the business and what it really looks like, he said, they're focused like a laser beam. They're all there early. They're like, their eye contact is great. It's a completely different body language. So the difference between those who understand what they're really up against and those that don't is really night and day.
So, which is great, because eventually the ransomware attackers are going to fix the problem for us. They'll make everybody totally aware. It'll be the best security awareness training they could get at an extremely high cost.
Yes, and for public companies, it can be it gets them in kind of trouble too, doesn't it? I mean, more so than a private company, in the sense of they're not, because they are publicly traded. I can't remember which, Sarbanes-Oxley or one of those, where they can also get into trouble because they didn't take care of that, right? Am I wrong on that?
Yeah, they have to report to the SEC if they're U.S. public traded, or the regulator if they're in the UK. And then if the trouble with publicly traded companies is they've got a big bureaucracy, right? So they can't just take action and fix a problem. There has to be a lot of committee meetings in order for it to happen, and that just leads to slow reaction times.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think that the challenge too is it's scary, the numbers that of companies that get hit by ransomware. And I've seen different reports ranging from 30, and I don't necessarily believe these numbers, as high as 70%, but certainly 30 to 40% of companies hit by a major ransomware attack go bankrupt. They're not in business a year later. And of course, when you're talking about governments and the public sector, that's not an option. You can't just not have a government of whatever city or county or state you've got. So, I mean, but the impact can be substantial, as we've seen in cities and counties and states all over the country. Public service is not available, obviously, critical infrastructure going down. Operations that people expect you can do, like buying and selling houses and all kinds of different licenses and things, have gone down and will go down continually with ransomware attacks.
Yep. Yeah, we used to say, for publicly traded companies, I don't know of a single case of the company's stock long-term suffering from any type of breach, right? So TJ Maxx, Target, they're all, at least twice what they were when they were breached. So it's the old adage, they're in the press and people will recognize the name, but they forget, what the problem was in the first place. So I don't know about you, but I stopped shopping at Target until they had all new point of sales terminals. And then I thought, oh, they must be serious. So I'm back.
Yeah, I even had couple of my credit cards hit because of all those various breaches. Because I'm real careful about how I use the credit cards, and I don't have the same passwords for any of the stuff. And I still got hit because there's so much stuff out there on the black market that they can buy on the dark web, right?
Yep. One of the interesting things they can buy is, so Dan was describing how they get, initial access through phishing attacks usually. So, but then they launch an attack on that endpoint that connected, they move laterally, and then they finally get to a critical server. Then they go and they sell it on the dark web. They sell access to that for as little as $75. They'll say, hey, I've got, the Active Directory server for a major train company. And, I've got basically console access of a super user. You can have that for $75. And you'd think that data's out there, everybody would subscribe to the threat intelligence vendors or telling them about that stuff. No, they're not. They're just sitting there for a month, and somebody buys it, and executes ransomware.
Interesting.
Well, I mean, I pay a little extra out of my paycheck every 2 weeks to have that kind of thing. I have a they have a service here that they offer to LTU employees for identity theft monitoring. And I pay for it. It's only a few bucks a month. I mean, is that stuff worthwhile for the average person to get?
Yeah, totally. Just go to creditkarma.com.
Yeah, that's what I have. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And then you'll know if people are dinging your credit, and it helps just your overall credit health because you monitor what's causing your score to go up or down. So it's great stuff.
Yeah, I would add to that a lot of people aren't aware that, we in our family here, I don't mind mentioning it, Flagstar Bank was one, but there's a lot, some people in our family have Flagstar, and they had an incident here in Michigan. It was public. But a lot of people get those letters and, saying we're offering you 2 years of free credit protection, or a year, or I've seen 3 years. It's amazing how many people never do it. I mean, and actually, it's funny, you talk to different companies. I'm not talking about Flagstar specifically here, but I've seen this with a wide variety of banks and other organizations. They expect that the take up is going to be less than 50%. And I've seen numbers much lower than that.
I'm sure it's really tiny.
It's definitely, and I'm not going to say the number that's in my mind, but it's less than 50%. I mean, yeah. It is. But the point is, if you get those letters, if you're watching this, you're hearing this, and you get those, it doesn't automatically happen. You've got to go ahead and call the number, or go to the website, put in the free code, your number, whatever. Obviously, make sure it's legitimate. If you want to verify that this is not a scam, then you want to obviously. But I mean, in most cases, these are legitimate letters. They're coming to you via the U.S. mail, and it says, XYZ, whatever organization you're working with got hacked, got a breach, 2 years of free credit protection. Take advantage of that, because that's valuable to have. Small percentages, as Richard said, of people actually use that. So highly encourage people to follow through.
Yeah, absolutely. It would seem like, if they're offering it to you for free, why not?
Yeah, Capital One got hit real bad, and I think their settlement was somewhere around $150 million, because I've seen the stories come through. Apparently, my card wasn't one of them, because I didn't get the letter from Capital One with all that information. But a lot of other people at Capital One got hit. So
yeah, and I think the funny thing is, I think some people just think it's going to happen automatically, or somehow you're protected. You've got my information, my social security number, my credit card number. Go ahead and protect me. But that's not the way it works. You've got to actually, actively enroll. And then the other thing I think people are a little bit naive about is just how often that even happens. I mean, it's pretty unbelievable, really, the number of letters that, even my own house, and my friends and neighbors and relatives have gotten letters. I mean, I hear about it almost once a month. Somebody's getting a letter and they're calling me and asking me about this. So it's pretty common.
The ones I do throw out are the class action lawsuits. Little tiny fine print, you were in a breach, these lawyers got together. They've got like 2 people that are suing the company, and they're going to collect $100 million, and you're going to get $5.
Yeah, that's usually what it boils down to.
And you give away your right to ever sue that company for that infraction. So,
right
now.
All right, well, we got about 5 minutes left. So this audience is kind of a mix, a lot of business folks, but a lot of tech savvy folks. So quickly, what sort of advice would you give everybody on how to keep the bad guys out from, particularly if they're going? Because everybody thinks, oh, it's only going to be the big companies that get hit with ransomware because they have all the money, but that's not the case, right?
Yeah. I always recommend having the latest and greatest Windows operating system if you're a Windows company. For sure, that holds true for Mac as well. And that just, the older versions, Windows has new versions because in large part, they're more secure than the older versions. And Microsoft spends a lot of time protecting those. So definitely have that. Do your backups, use strong authentication. There, I stole all your thunder, Dan.
No, those are all good. I would just say, use 2-factor authentication and multi-factor authentication wherever you can. Certainly if you're doing banking, if you're doing any kind of financial transactions or anything, really, I just say it's now gotten to the point across the board, you should be using multi-factor authentication. There's a great list of tips at you can just Google Shields Up, DHS, Department of Homeland Security, Shields Up. Richard and I like to mention that, but it's CISA.gov/Shields Up, SHIELDS-up. Great list of tips for businesses. There's a lot of details there we can't mention in 1 or 2 minutes, but links to websites you can trust. Really, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency does a great job of kind of hot intelligence there within your sector as well. So if you're in banking or you're in, whatever, retail or government, they've got some specific tips as well within there. But yeah, patching your systems, multi-factor authentication, making sure you have an incident response plan and you practice with, as Richard mentioned, with backups and then restoring the backups. One last thing on that, Gartner said at a recent conference, I was at their security conference in June, like the number 3 item that they were saying, a lot of organizations are now doing tabletop exercises. They're practicing for incidents, but they never actually do the restores of their data. They get to a certain point, 30 minutes in, an hour in, so at this point, we're going to hit the green easy button and all the data is going to magically be restored and everything's going to be fine. So we can all go home. But that's not the way it really works in real life. And the easy button doesn't exist. And there's plenty of cases where people had backups, but they discovered it was going to take weeks or maybe months to bring everything they had to do to bring their systems back up to actually get the data from the backup facilities or sites or the pipes, all the things that might go wrong. And they said, well, we have to go ahead and pay the ransom because we can't be down for 6 weeks or 8 weeks. So, make sure you've got those processes in place as well.
And the biggest thing is don't be stupid and click on a message that you're not expecting from someone or some group you've never heard of. I see it all the time coming through my email. They're going to bill me for something because they want me to click on the link and then boom, I got the bad malware coming in, right?
Yep. And if you're an organization and have control over your enterprise email, put some protections in place so people can't see live links to click on, and just add some friction so they have time to think about it.
Okay.
Email is a huge area. That's really big, really important to make sure you've got email protection.
Yeah, absolutely.